Two young lovers vanished without a trace on their wedding night. No bodies, no leads, just silence. Years passed, and the world forgot them. But then, out of nowhere, a letter arrived. One that should have been impossible. What it revealed would unravel a mystery buried beneath decades of lies, fear, and love stronger than anyone imagined. This story will pull you deep into one of the most haunting disappearances you've never heard of until now. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to say hello. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let's begin the journey. Willow Creek was the kind of town where doors stayed unlocked and neighbors called each other by name even after decades. Life moved at the gentle pace of rustling trees and screen doors creaking open in the afternoon sun. In the summer of 1985, the heart of the town beat with excitement, for this day was not like any other. It was the wedding of Emily Hartman and Daniel Cole, two local sweethearts whose love story had grown under the watchful eyes of nearly everyone in town. From lemonade stands as kids to slow dances in the high school gym, Emily and Daniel had shared everything: hopes, losses, secrets, and dreams. And now they were sharing their vows. The ceremony was held beneath the grand oak tree at the edge of Miller's Field, a place many in town believed held good luck. The tree had stood for generations, its branches wide like open arms, a perfect canopy for the occasion. Emily, in a dress sewn by her grandmother's hands, walked barefoot down the grassy aisle, her hair gathered in soft curls with tiny wildflowers tucked in. Daniel, tall and a little awkward in his father's tailored suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. They exchanged promises with trembling voices and full hearts. As they kissed, the crowd erupted in cheers, laughter, and even a few tears. For a brief, golden moment, everything in the world felt exactly right. Afterward, the reception buzzed with music and stories under strings of warm lanterns. Old friends drank sweet tea and danced to Johnny Cash tunes played on a crackling radio. Emily's father toasted the couple with misty eyes, recalling the day she was born and how he'd known then she'd grow into someone brave and kind. Daniel's mother, quiet and reserved, simply took her new daughter-in-law's hand and held it tightly. The sun began to dip behind the hills, casting a honeyed glow over the field, and just before twilight, the couple slipped away. Their send-off was modest. They drove off in Daniel's restored 1956 Chevy Bel Air, a gleaming turquoise relic with white leather seats and chrome that caught every last bit of the sunset. Friends had decorated the back with streamers and painted "Just Married" across the window. As they rolled down Main Street, horns honked, children waved, and an old man outside the barber shop raised his cap with a smile. Emily leaned her head out of the window, her laughter dancing in the wind, and Daniel honked the horn twice his signal for goodbye. Their destination was known to only a handful of people. It was a small hand-built cabin nestled deep in the pine woods about 40 miles outside town, a hidden place that had belonged to Daniel's late uncle, a reclusive man who had left it to Daniel in his will. The couple had planned to spend a quiet week there. No phones, no visitors, just the two of them, the trees, and the stars. It was meant to be the perfect start to their new life together. But by morning, something felt wrong. Emily's mother called the house and got no answer. She assumed they had simply decided to unplug, and for the next 2 days, she tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest. By the end of the week, that worry had curdled into dread. The couple hadn't returned. They hadn't called. No one had seen them since the wedding night. Emily's father drove to the cabin himself, his heart pounding with every mile. But when he arrived, he found only a locked front door, dust on the porch, and the car gone. No signs of struggle, no note. No Emily, no Daniel. The police were called. Search teams combed the forest for days, Volunteers walked through muddy trails with flashlights and dogs, and helicopters buzzed overhead. But there was nothing, not a single trace. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. Their families were beside themselves. Daniel's father, a stern former Navy man, stood in the sheriff's office demanding answers while Emily's mother sat in silence, clinging to her daughter's favorite sweater. The town watched, helpless and heartbroken. Rumors spread quickly. Some said they'd eloped somewhere else and didn't want to be found. Others whispered darker theories that they'd run into something in the woods they shouldn't have. Something evil. Something final. Weeks passed, then months. The case grew cold. No leads. No suspects. No evidence of any kind. The town moved forward slowly, like walking through deep snow. Daniel's best friend left town not long after. Emily's sister went off to college and rarely came home, but Emily's mother, she stayed. She refused to move a single item from her daughter's room. Every morning she walked to the mailbox, hoping, waiting, and each time returning empty-handed. Daniel's father died of a heart attack 3 years later. Some said from the stress. Others said from a broken spirit. The wedding day faded into memory, like an old photograph curling at the edges. The story of the bride and groom who vanished became a strange kind of folklore in Willow Creek, told in hushed tones to newcomers and children who dared each other to visit the cabin trail. But for those who knew them, who loved them, the pain never really dulled, only buried deeper. Only. They'd quieter dot until 12 years later, something arrived. Something that no one expected. The moment it became clear that Emily and Daniel weren't coming back was not loud or dramatic. There was no crash, no scream in the night, no frantic call. It was silence, long, aching silence, that began to spread through Willow Creek like a slow-moving fog. On the second day after the wedding, when they still hadn't phoned home or been seen at any store or diner along the usual roads, Emily's mother started calling every neighbor she knew. The answers were all the same. No, we haven't heard a thing. They assumed the couple wanted privacy, that they were tucked away in their little cabin, lost in each other. But by day 5, that excuse no longer held. By then, it felt like something had cracked. The call to the sheriff's department came on a Thursday morning. Sheriff Tom Redford, a man who'd served the town for over 20 years, took the report himself. He knew both families well, had watched Emily and Daniel grow up from behind his desk and through his own kitchen window. As his daughter had once gone to school with Emily, he dispatched 2 deputies to the cabin, not expecting trouble, just a misunderstanding, maybe a broken phone line or a car stuck in the mud. But when they arrived, the cabin stood in eerie stillness, locked up tight. There were no tire tracks, no scuff marks, no dropped belongings. No signs of anyone ever arriving there at all. The next day, Redford went up himself, along with a few volunteers and a couple of hound dogs trained to pick up scent. The cabin was carefully entered, but inside there was only dust and emptiness. The bed hadn't been slept in. There was no food in the fridge, no water in the jugs. Even the blankets remained neatly folded. Whatever their plans had been, it was clear now. They'd never made it to the cabin at all. Somewhere between the wedding field and the secluded dirt road that led to the woods, they had vanished. Search parties were organized in shifts. Locals poured out to help, combing the thick pine forests and the backcountry trails, looking for broken branches, pieces of clothing, anything that might explain what had happened. Helicopters were brought in from the state police to scour the forest from above, their blades thundering low over treetops, casting long shadows. Divers checked nearby creeks and lakes, hoping not to find what they feared. But days turned to weeks, and the search turned from hopeful to grim. The Bel Air, bright turquoise and unforgettable, was nowhere to be found. Not a tire mark, not a broken mirror, not even a discarded bouquet from the back seat. The land had swallowed them whole. Rumors began to fill the gaps that facts could not. Some said they'd staged it, that they had planned their escape from small-town life all along, vanishing into some larger world. Others were sure something darker had happened, that maybe someone from Daniel's past, someone tied to his father's military life, had followed them. There were those who claimed to see strange lights in the forest around that time, and a few old-timers swore the land beyond the cabin was cursed. The sheriff chased every lead, every whisper, but each ended in nothing. No ransom call ever came. No stolen credit cards. No airport footage. Just silence. Emily's father began to break down slowly, retreating from his auto shop, where once the air had buzzed with the sound of tools and country music on the radio. The sign on the front door eventually faded in the sun, closed until further notice. Daniel's mother moved in with her sister in Montana, unable to pass their son's empty room without crumbling. And yet, some held on. Emily's mother clung to her routines like a lifeline. She woke every morning before dawn, made coffee for two, and walked out to the mailbox, always pausing for a breath before opening it. Even when it was empty, she stood there, eyes scanning the road, as if expecting to see the Bel Air cresting the hill. Bringing her daughter home at last thought, the case officially went cold 13 months later, though unofficially it had been cold since the second week. Redford kept the file in the bottom drawer of his desk, revisiting it now and then in the dead of night. He left the job 5 years later, gray and quieter than before. The file passed to others, but none gave it more than a glance. Time was cruel, wearing down even the sharpest grief into a dull ache. The younger generation barely remembered the names, and the photos once pinned to the corkboard in the sheriff's office, curled and yellowed with age. But not everyone forgot. The story lived on in murmurs and memories. Teenagers dared each other to hike to the cabin on Halloween, telling ghost stories by flashlight. Tourists came through town asking if the tale was true. Old women in the diner shook their heads and whispered that some things were better left buried. But for those who had known Emily and Daniel, their laughter, their love, the way they looked at each other on that wedding day, the disappearance was not just a mystery. It was a wound. Gaping, unhealed loss that lingered in every quiet moment. And then, one morning, 12 years later, something happened. Something so unexpected, so chilling in its simplicity, that it brought the town and the past rushing back to life. A letter arrived. No return address. No warning. Just a name on the envelope. A name the town had not spoken aloud in years. Emily's younger sister, now living states away, opened it with trembling hands. And what she read changed everything. In the years that followed Emily and Daniel's disappearance, Willow Creek carried the weight of their absence like an old scar healed on the surface, but always aching beneath. At first, there was a wave of activity, voices rising in unity, prayer circles forming on front porches, and posters hung with hopeful eyes staring back from every telephone pole. But as time passed, the voices quieted, and the posters faded to ghostly sheets flapping in the wind. Life has a way of folding back into itself, retreating into the daily rhythm of chores and dinners and paychecks, and so the town did what it had to do. It kept going. But no one ever truly forgot. Emily's mother became a fixture of that forgetting emotion. Every morning, rain or shine, she would sit in the wooden rocker on her porch, hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed on the road. People waved as they passed, unsure what to say anymore. Some whispered that she'd gone soft in the head. Others said she simply knew something the rest of them didn't. She never stopped checking the mailbox, even after a decade. Not once. She'd watch the mail truck turn the corner, wait until it disappeared, and then walk the gravel path with a slow, measured step. She said nothing when it was empty, just sighed and went back inside. Her husband had died 3 winters earlier. Some said he simply gave up. He was found in his chair, a blanket over his legs, a photo of Emily and Daniel's wedding in his hands. Daniel's father had passed before that. The Navy man with the steely eyes and clenched jaw had never accepted that his son could vanish without reason. In the early days, he organized search parties and called in favors from old colleagues who still worked in law enforcement or government positions. But with every dead lead, something inside him hardened. He became colder, more withdrawn, and in the last years of his life, barely spoke to anyone at all. He died alone in a modest house filled with unanswered questions and boxes of maps and files that no one wanted to look through anymore. Sheriff Redford retired and moved to Nevada to live with his daughter. The new sheriff, younger and less emotionally tied to the case, kept the file buried deep in storage. The town grew used to the silence. New families moved in, unaware of the names that once filled every conversation. Children played in Miller's field where the wedding had taken place, their laughter light and innocent, a stark contrast to the shadows that had once lingered there. But those who had been there, who had seen Emily smile or shaken Daniel's hand, carried the memory with them like a hidden stone in their pocket, something they reached for unconsciously when the wind shifted just right or a certain song played on the radio. And so it was that when the letter arrived, it wasn't just a tremor. It was an earthquake. It came on a cold November morning in 1997 to a mailbox in Seattle belonging to Emily's younger sister, Rachel. She was now 32, a teacher with a quiet apartment and a life she'd built cautiously, always under the shadow of her sister's disappearance. She checked her mail like she always did, bills, flyers, nothing unusual, until her fingers touched the smooth, yellowed envelope. There was no return address. The paper felt oddly stiff, the corners soft with age. And when she saw the names printed simply across the front, to Rachel Hartman, her breath caught. She opened it slowly, carefully, as if the air around her had thickened. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed on an old typewriter. The ink was fresh, but the wording was strange, deliberate, restrained. It read, "We never meant to leave like that. We had no choice. We're sorry. E&D." That was all. No date, no location, just those haunting words. Her hand shook as she read them again and again. Her first instinct was disbelief, a trick, a prank, someone's cruel joke. But something about the paper, the way the initials were signed, the simplicity of the message, it all felt chillingly real. Rachel hadn't heard anyone call her Ratch in years, but Emily had always used her full name. She hadn't spoken to Daniel much before they vanished, but his handwriting had once been on a note, thanking her for helping with the wedding. She remembered the sharp, clean way he wrote the letter D. Even though the letter was typed, something about it struck her as familiar, intimate. The weight of it was unbearable. She called the police, who referred her to local authorities, who referred her to the Oregon State Police. The letter was scanned, photographed, and tested. No fingerprints, no DNA. The postmark was smeared, barely legible, possibly intentional. A forensic analyst determined that the paper stock and envelope had been manufactured in the early 90s but didn't match anything local. Someone had gone out of their way to be anonymous. When the news reached Willow Creek, it spread like wildfire. People stood still in the aisles of the grocery store. At the diner, waitresses dropped plates as whispers grew louder. It was as if the town had been holding its breath for 12 years and could finally exhale, even if what they inhaled next was a fog of confusion and unease. Emily's mother received a copy of the letter, delivered by a local deputy. She didn't cry. She simply held the paper close, like it was warm, like it was breathing. "I knew," she said softly. "I knew she wasn't gone." And with that, the questions began to rise again, not just the old ones. but new ones, sharper and more unsettling. What did they mean by no choice? Where had they been all these years? Why now? And above all, were they still out there? Somewhere in the world, watching from the edges, waiting for something none of them could understand. The day the letter arrived was cold and gray. The kind of November morning where the sun barely rises and the light seems to settle into everything like ash. In Seattle, the streets were wet with a light drizzle, the kind that didn't quite call for an umbrella, but made every breath feel damp and metallic. Rachel Hartman had been awake since 5, sipping her coffee in silence by the kitchen window of her apartment on the 3rd floor of a modest brick building just off Rainier Avenue. It was her habit now, these quiet mornings alone, before the city fully woke. She liked the stillness, the faint hum of the radiator, the sound of distant traffic beginning its day. After years of unanswered questions, Rachel had learned how to live with silence. She never let herself expect answers anymore. When the envelope came, she didn't notice it at first. She had walked the 3 blocks to her mailbox like she always did after a shift at the high school. Bills, a grocery flyer, a letter from a former student. And then it was there buried near the bottom, an aged, cream-colored envelope with no return address. Her name was typed neatly in the center. Just Rachel Hartman. Not Miss. Not Miss. No street number. Just her name, and somehow it had still found its way to her. She stared at it for a long time, standing under the soft whir of the building's fluorescent hallway light, her fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't the kind of envelope people used anymore. The texture was old-fashioned, the kind her grandmother used to write holiday cards on, thick and soft at the corners. For a moment, she considered throwing it away. She'd gotten strange things before: phony psychic letters claiming they'd found Emily, junk mail with her sister's name randomly typed in bold to catch attention. But something about this one was different. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in presence, as if whatever it held had been waiting a very long time to reach her. She opened it carefully, almost reverently, as if peeling back a scab that had never quite healed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. It smelled faintly of old wood and ink, like something that had spent time in a drawer, untouched for years. The message was typed in block letters, with no date, no greeting, and no signature beyond the initials. The words were simple but devastating. We never meant to leave like that. We had no choice. We're sorry. E&D. Rachel read it once. Then again, her vision blurring as the meaning soaked in. She sat down on the hallway steps, clutching the letter with both hands, her pulse thudding in her ears. E&D Emily and Daniel. Her sister and the boy she had loved since they were 12. A ghost had spoken. After 12 years of silence, of birthdays missed and holidays passed with an empty chair at the table, here was a voice from the void. It made no sense, and yet it made all the sense in the world. The phrasing was strange. We had no choice, like a secret not just kept, but buried. And why now? Why after so many years? She didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the letter spread out in front of her, replaying every memory of her sister's voice, her laughter, the way she used to hum while brushing her hair. She tried to remember if Daniel ever mentioned running away, if there were signs she had missed, but there had been none. Just a sudden, clean break from the world. Until now, by the next morning, she called the police. Seattle officers referred her to the Oregon State Police, who took the letter seriously enough to send someone to retrieve it. It was passed through the hands of analysts and agents, photocopied, scanned under ultraviolet light, examined for fingerprints. There were none. No DNA. The ink was modern, but the paper stock matched a brand manufactured only until 1992. The envelope had no postmark, no traceable route. It had been mailed likely, hand-dropped into the system quietly, somewhere along its way, hidden. Like a message in a bottle. News of the letter reached Willow Creek within a matter of days. At first, only the sheriff and a few key figures were told. But small towns have their own way of breathing, and soon the story seeped into every home, every back porch, every corner booth at the diner. Conversations that hadn't been had in years erupted overnight. It was like someone had thrown a match into a dry field of memory. People pulled out old photographs, whispered old theories, dusted off long-forgotten pieces of the puzzle. But most of all, they wondered the same thing Rachel had: where had the couple been all this time, and what had they meant by no choice? Emily's mother was given a copy of the letter by a state officer who drove down personally. She opened it in silence, her hands slow but steady. She didn't ask questions. She didn't collapse. She read it, folded it again, and placed it in the top drawer of her nightstand. "She's still in the world," she said softly, barely above a whisper. "That's enough for me." But for others, it wasn't enough. The simplicity of the message only deepened the mystery. Why reach out now? What had changed? Were Emily and Daniel alive, somewhere in hiding? Or was this a final farewell? A message delayed by time or guilt? And if they were alive, why stay away so long, knowing what they left behind? The sheriff reopened the case quietly, calling in old files, assembling a task force. Retired Detective Ray Martinez, who had led the original investigation and left the force years ago, heard about the letter through a former colleague. He drove back into town the following week, older now, slower, but with the same sharp fire behind his eyes. He stared at the letter for a long time in the sheriff's office before saying anything at all. "This wasn't just a disappearance," he said finally. "It was a cover. And whatever it is, they're still running from it." Detective Ray Martinez had seen his fair share of strange things in 30 years of law enforcement, but few cases had clung to his bones the way Emily and Daniel's had. He still remembered the long nights combing the woods with nothing but a flashlight and the weight of the town's expectations. He'd always believed they hadn't just run away. Something about the way everything had gone quiet so suddenly, so cleanly, had never sat right with him. Even after retirement, he kept the case file locked in his desk at home, flipping through it every so often like a man rereading a book he couldn't stop thinking about. When he got the call about the letter, he didn't hesitate. He packed a bag, got in his car, and drove the 7 hours back to Willow Creek in a single stretch, the road a blur beneath his tires and his mind already racing ahead. The letter sat under glass in the sheriff's office, guarded like a relic. Martinez stood over it for a long time, reading the words again and again. "We never meant to leave like that. We had no choice. We're sorry, E&D." It wasn't just a confession. It was a code or the edge of one. He asked for everything they had: the envelope, the scans, the photos, even the chain of custody report. He read it all in silence, eyebrows furrowed, lips pressed into a line. And then he asked a question no one else had thought to ask. "Has anyone checked the deed to the cabin lately?" It was a curious thing, often overlooked. The cabin, gifted to Daniel by his uncle, had sat unused for years after the disappearance. The Cole family never attempted to sell it, and the town left it alone, treating it more like a monument than a property. But Martinez's instincts were rarely wrong. Within 2 days, they had the paperwork. And that's when something strange emerged. About 6 months earlier, long before the letter had arrived, a Fuji man had attempted to quietly file a request to transfer ownership of the cabin. The name on the documents was Daniel Cole, not a relative, not a corporation, the name itself. The application had been flagged due to incomplete ID and ultimately discarded, but a scan had been filed away. The signature was shaky but deliberate. The handwriting experts compared it to old samples, birthday cards, yearbook messages, even the note Daniel had scribbled on the guest book at his wedding. And the match was strong enough to raise eyebrows. It didn't prove anything, but it stirred something long dormant. If it was truly him, why try to reclaim the cabin after all these years? And why now? Martinez requested access to the cabin. Immediately, the land around it had become wild, with tall grass overtaking the gravel path and moss crawling up the sides of the structure. A padlock still clung to the front door, rusted shut, but the key was easily retrieved from the sheriff's archive. The inside was exactly as it had been, left, dust covering the counters. A few forgotten cans in the pantry, cobwebs stretched across the corners. But Martinez wasn't looking at eye level. He was thinking beneath Dot in the back room. Behind a collapsed bookcase, he found a trapdoor. It creaked open with effort, the hinges resisting as if holding a secret. Below was a short flight of stairs leading into a crawl space that had been outfitted crudely, but intentionally. A single mattress lay in one corner, flattened by years of weight. Rusted tins and wrappers were scattered nearby. There were books, mostly damaged by moisture, and the faint, lingering scent of something human, something recent. It wasn't a place someone had lived long-term, but someone had been here. Not 12 years ago. Recently Dot and in the far corner. Buried under a warped piece of plywood, he found something that made the air tighten in his chest. An old, dust-covered camcorder Dot. It was a bulky Sony model from the early 90s, the kind that recorded straight to VHS. Martinez took it back to the station and tracked down a working player from the high school drama department. He inserted the tape, holding his breath. The screen flickered, static crawling across the edges, and then there he was, Daniel, older than he had been when he vanished, with longer hair, a beard, and a deep weariness in his eyes. He was sitting on the floor, speaking directly to the camera, his voice low but clear. If someone's seeing this, it means we're probably already gone, or close to it. I don't know who to trust anymore. We never meant for it to happen. Like this, we thought we could just disappear, just start over. But there's something bigger than us. Something we didn't understand back then, something we still don't. They're watching. They always were. Then the screen cut to static. Martinez rewound it, played it again. The words, "they're watching," echoed like footsteps in an empty hall. Who was he talking about? What had they seen? And where was Emily? More than ever, Martinez felt the puzzle tightening around him, the pieces slowly shifting into place. The tape had been hidden for a reason, the cabin revisited with intention. Daniel had returned, if only briefly, and he had left behind breadcrumbs. But to what end? The team searched the area around the cabin more thoroughly now, eyes sharpened. By purpose. They found boot prints in the mud near the edge of the property, partially obscured by new growth. They found a crushed cigarette pack buried beneath a pile of pine needles, one that hadn't existed in stores since 1996. Martinez took it all in with the grim patience of a man circling a long-lost trail. He knew something was coming. The letter wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and the couple who had vanished were no longer ghosts. They were moving pieces in a mystery that had never truly gone cold. The cabin sat deep within the trees, like a secret long forgotten, surrounded by towering pines whose limbs creaked in the wind like they were whispering warnings. Time had not been kind to it. Shingles had slipped from the roof. Ivy had climbed halfway up its siding, and the steps to the porch sagged under the weight of each footfall. But beneath the weathered boards and hollow silence, something lingered, an air of unfinished business, a feeling that someone had once walked these floors in fear or in hiding. Detective Ray Martinez stood in the doorway, letting the stillness settle around him. He had been here before, years ago, when everything had been fresher. when Emily and Daniel were still faces on flyers and not names attached to dust and memories. But this time, the cabin didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused on. He moved through each room slowly, taking notes, studying the edges. The living room still held the old green sofa Daniel's uncle had left behind, the fabric stiff and sun-bleached. In the kitchen, the cupboards were empty, but a single chipped mug sat in the sink with a faint ring of dried coffee near the bottom. Upstairs, the bedroom was untouched, the bed neatly made, the curtains drawn, the mattress bare except for a thin layer of dust. Nothing told a story on its own. It was the silence that told him to look deeper. The crawl space had already revealed one secret: the camcorder, the tape, Daniel's cryptic message. But as Martinez knelt again on the cold earth beneath the house, he noticed something he hadn't before. The floorboards under the crawl space had a thin gap between them, and wedged deep between two slats was something metallic. With care, he pried it free, a tarnished locket, the clasp broken, the chain tangled in dirt. Inside was a photo, faded and water-damaged, but still visible. Emily's face, smiling in the sun, beside Daniel, whose arm was wrapped around her shoulder. The photo was old, older than the wedding, high school, maybe. But on the back, scribbled in faint pen, were 4 words: not safe, not yet. Martinez turned the locket over in his hands, his brow furrowed. This wasn't a keepsake dropped by accident. It was hidden intentionally, tucked where someone thought it might one day be found. And it was a message. Someone had wanted to be remembered, or perhaps to warn whoever came next. He bagged the locket and took it outside, holding it to the sunlight filtering through the branches. The words weren't just desperate. They were deliberate. He called in a forensic team from Salem. They arrived 2 days later, sweeping the cabin with soft brushes and UV lights. Beneath the wallpaper in the back bedroom, they found words etched lightly into the wood, almost invisible without special lighting. "Do not trust the man with the silver pen." It was scrawled hurriedly, jagged as if written in fear. Number, name, no explanation, just a warning. The phrase meant nothing at first, but Martinez had seen enough coded messages in his career to know when fear spoke louder than clarity. He ordered a full excavation of the crawl space and a scan of the surrounding land with ground-penetrating radar. 3 days later, they found a small lockbox buried under the back corner of the cabin, near the base of a twisted pine. The box was rusted shut and took nearly an hour to open without damaging the contents. Inside were several items: a folded map with handwritten notes, a pocket-sized journal, and a Polaroid photograph of what appeared to be a group of men in dark jackets standing outside a government building. The photo had no names, no date, but one of the men wore a silver lapel pin oval-shaped, unfamiliar. On the back of the photograph was a name written in ink: Wendell Rourke. The journal belonged to Daniel. His handwriting filled every page, tight and precise, his thoughts scattered and sharp. The entries were dated between 1986 and 1989, years after their disappearance, written sporadically and often abruptly. Some passages read like journal entries, others like warnings. They thought we knew something we didn't. We were just trying to disappear, but they wouldn't let us go. Emily says we should come back, but I can't. Not until we're sure no one's watching. He found us again. 3rd time in 6 months. Always the same car, the same pin. We are not the only ones. There are others. As Martinez read the entries under the flicker of an old desk lamp back at the sheriff's office, the pieces began to form a shape he hadn't seen before. This wasn't a simple elopement gone wrong. Emily and Daniel hadn't vanished into a dream. They had run from something real, something organized, something persistent. They had lived off-grid, moved in shadows, feared being found not by family, but by something larger. An entity, maybe. A man. Someone with power and reach and a reason to keep them quiet. He photocopied every page, memorized every date, and sent the originals to a federal analyst he trusted from his days in Portland. Meanwhile, he drove to every archive he could reach, searching for any trace of the name Wendell Rourke. Days passed. Leads dried up. Then, from an old federal personnel registry obtained through a former contact, he found it. Rourke had once worked for a now-defunct intelligence unit in the late 80s, classified work, little on record, mostly overseas. No known address, no recent photo. Just a trace of a man with a habit of disappearing. Martinez sat alone that evening. The map spread before him. The journal opened to the last page. Emily's name was written there, once, underlined 3 times. No explanation, just her name. And beside it, a date July 17th, 1997. Just 4 months before the letter had arrived. Something had changed that summer. Something had brought them close enough to risk reaching out. Martinez circled the date and leaned back in his chair. He didn't know what was coming next, but he could feel it like a storm building just beyond the tree line. The name Wendell Rourke had been just a thread at first, thin and frayed, barely distinguishable from the background noise of 100 other cold leads. But Ray Martinez knew better than to dismiss something that refused to vanish, that kept appearing where it shouldn't. The man in the photo-sharp-jawed, stiff posture, a silver pin catching the light just enough to gleam like a quiet warning, was the same face that had haunted the edges of Daniel's journal entries. And as Martinez dug further into the fading, records of forgotten agencies, defunct field units, and quietly buried programs, Rourke's name began to echo louder through the silence. What he found was sparse, the remnants of a man who had lived in the gray. Wendell J. Rourke, born 1943, enlisted in the Army in 1961, served 2 tours in Vietnam, transitioned into intelligence work by the mid-70s. By 1980, he was attached to a covert domestic unit under the Office of Special Operations and Agency. That, on paper, didn't exist anymore. The last documented position held was liaison officer, though the what or whom remained conveniently redacted. A brief notation in an internal memo from 1988 referred to him as retired, but the context was vague, and the date fell suspiciously close to when Emily and Daniel first vanished. Martinez knew that people like Rourke didn't simply retire. They vanished behind different doors, or behind new names. He sent a formal inquiry to every agency he could think of, but most came back with either no record or tightly worded denials. It was only after a late-night call to a retired U.S. Marshal named Gordon Delaney, a man who owed Martinez a favor from a case long ago, that he got his first real lead. Delaney, gravel-voiced and cautious, remembered Rourke. He wasn't the kind of guy you invited to the table, he said. He was the guy who stood behind it, arms crossed, watching who sat where. Never smiled, always listening. I saw him once in '87. Came into a case in Nevada, some compound, out in the desert. Feds brushed it off as nothing, but Rourke was there a week before it burned down. 2 people died. No one ever followed up. That same week, Martinez discovered a connection buried deep in the guest logs of a private lodge in Montana. In 1996, a man had checked in under the name Walter Reeves, but the ID used flagged later in a fraud case had Rourke's photo. The lodge owner remembered him clearly. Polite, quiet, always paid in cash, but he asked a lot of questions. About land, about cabins, about remote places. Martinez's heart tightened. Willow Creek wasn't far from there. And if Rourke had been looking for somewhere off-grid, somewhere people might run to, he may have followed Emily and Daniel far longer than anyone imagined. The name surfaced again, this time in a classified memo obtained through a whistleblower. File decrypted, and posted anonymously online. It referenced an internal containment operation linked to Project Anchor, dated 1985, listing two civilian identifiers only by first names Emily and Daniel. Martinez stared at the document for a long time. The initials of the agent in charge were WR. He knew then that whatever Emily and Daniel had run from was tied to more than personal danger. It was systemic. And Rourke, the man with the silver pin, had been sent or had taken it upon himself to monitor, silence, or erase whatever truth they had come too close to. The words in Daniel's journal came back like a whisper. They thought we knew something we didn't. We were just trying to disappear. With this, Martinez returned to Rachel Hartman. He showed her the photo of Rourke, the journal passages, the etched warning behind the wallpaper. She went pale. "I saw that man once," she said slowly, "at Emily's wedding. He wasn't a guest, just standing near the edge of the field, wearing a gray suit. I remember because he didn't smile, didn't clap. He just watched." The revelation hit like thunder. Rourke had been there that day, not after, not as a reaction, but before. Martinez now saw the possibility that chilled him to his core. Emily and Daniel hadn't vanished and then been pursued. They had already been marked. Their wedding wasn't just the beginning of their new life. It had been the final step before escape. Something had driven them to leave everything behind, and Rourke had been the reason. Martinez filed a motion through federal court to unseal archived communications from the now-defunct agency Rourke worked for, citing new evidence tied to a missing persons case. The motion was stalled, delayed, then denied under national security exceptions. That alone spoke volumes. The closer he came, the harder the walls seemed to reinforce themselves. And then, just before dawn one morning, a package arrived at the Willow Creek station, addressed simply to RM. No return address. Inside was a flash drive, unmarked. Martinez plugged it into an offline machine, hands steady but tight. A single video file. Grainy footage, timestamped July 19th, 1997. A wooded area. A small fire. Two figures, Daniel, older, bearded, looking over his shoulder constantly, and Emily, her hair shorter, face gaunt but unmistakably hers. She was speaking, voice low, tired. "We've tried to stay gone," she said. "But if this gets out, it means we've failed. He found us, again. We can't keep running forever. If anyone finds this, don't look for us. Don't ask questions. You won't like the answers." The video ended there. Martinez leaned back in his chair, the screen dark before him. It was no longer just a disappearance. It was a warning, a plea, and a line drawn in the sand between the truth and the people determined to bury it. And through it all, the name lingered like smoke. Wendell Rourke. The flash drive hadn't just opened a door, it had torn the wall down. Detective Ray Martinez sat in the darkened office long after the video ended, staring into the glow of the paused frame on the screen, the frozen image of Emily's face. Dim and grainy, but unmistakably urgent. Her voice, soft but edged with steel, echoed in his memory like a bell still ringing. "Don't look for us. Don't ask questions. You won't like the answers." It wasn't fear that drove her words, it was warning. Not a cry for help, but a flare fired from the edge of something no one was meant to see. He watched the video 3 more times that night. Each time he noticed new things. The way Daniel kept glancing off camera, jaw clenched, one hand gripping something out of frame, maybe a weapon. The campfire burning low, casting their faces in flickers of gold and shadow. The way Emily paused before saying, "He found us again," as if she were weighing what even that meant. It was not desperation he saw, but fatigue. They had been running not for days or months, but for years. And they were tired. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep, only hides. Martinez made the call at dawn. He sent a secure copy of the video to his federal contact in Portland, asking for a full breakdown frame analysis, geolocation clues, voice modulation checks. Then he poured himself a cup of stale coffee and opened Daniel's journal again. There, in one of the entries from 1989, were 4 words that struck him like a match on dry wood. Whistleblower in Anchorage confirmed. There was no other context. Just that, scribbled on a page between mentions of coded messages and the phrase, "Interior checkpoint compromised." Anchorage thought it was the first real geographical lead he had. With permission from the sheriff, Martinez boarded a plane to Alaska 2 days later. The air was colder than he expected for September, and the gray skies felt heavy in a way that mirrored everything he carried inside. He rented a car and drove to the State Records Archive, where a helpful clerk named Janine, who had worked there for over 20 years, agreed to dig through old federal employment logs and local investigative files. What she found, buried in a box labeled MISC, clearance denied, was a sealed file marked with the name Thomas Greaves, internal correspondent, -1987-88. Inside were 3 letters and a summary report. The letters had been addressed to a federal oversight committee that never responded. Greaves had claimed he witnessed unauthorized surveillance operations on U.S. citizens by a covert domestic team known only by the code name Anchor. He described black bag jobs, silent detentions, and the monitoring of civilians flagged as contingency risks. One name was redacted throughout, but the letters referenced a young couple in Oregon, presumed to be harboring classified knowledge, Martinez's. Breath caught. Greaves had disappeared in 1989. No formal investigation. No forwarding address. The summary report stated simply, "Relocated for safety." A line later added in different handwriting, barely visible in pencil, read, "Rourke, disapproved." The web was growing denser. It wasn't just that Emily and Daniel had seen something. They had somehow fallen into the orbit of a machinery built to silence. Whether it was by accident or design, Martinez still didn't know. But the reach of that machinery had clearly extended far beyond Willow Creek. The fact that Rourke had shown up in Montana, at the cabin, at the wedding itself, those weren't coincidences. That was surveillance. That was preemptive containment. Back in Oregon, Martinez returned to the sheriff's office carrying a copy of the Greaves file and an annoying weight of confirmation. Everything was pointing toward one chilling truth. Emily and Daniel had not merely fled. They had been forced into disappearance. Not because they were guilty, but because some group believed they might one day know too much. And worse, believed they might tell. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he reviewed every report from the first weeks of the couple's disappearance, eyewitness statements, route maps, the search logs from the Red Hills Trail. And something strange emerged. One of the earliest reports, written off at the time as misdirection, had come from a forest ranger who claimed to have seen a black utility van with federal plates near the trailhead 2 hours before Emily and Daniel were expected to arrive. The van had no insignia, no department markings, and disappeared before search efforts began. No one followed up. It was chalked up to coincidence. Martinez now circled that note in red. He drove to the ranger's home the next morning. The man, now in his 70s, lived alone with his dog in a quiet house just outside Eugene. When Martinez introduced himself and asked about that morning in 1985, the old ranger didn't hesitate. "I remember that van," he said. "I tried to report it to the local station. Guy inside wouldn't give a name. Just flashed a badge, real quick. Told me I saw nothing and to keep my mouth shut. I figured it was just some classified thing I wasn't meant to know about." Martinez sat back, the old wheels turning. "What did he look like?" he asked. The ranger thought for a moment. "Tall, sharp suit, cold eyes, had a little pin on. His lapel looked like a silver oval. The room fell silent. It had been Rourke. He had been there. Not after the fact, not chasing them, but intercepting them, perhaps orchestrating the disappearance itself. And if that were true, then Emily and Daniel's escape had not been a retreat, it had been a miracle. Martinez left the Rangers' house with his stomach twisted into knots. The revelation was no longer dangerous in theory, it was dangerous in truth. There were people who had buried this story for over a decade, and they hadn't done it with red tape or bureaucracy. They had done it with intimidation, surveillance, and fear. And now, with the letter, the video, and the journal in his hands, he had torn the scab off something that was never meant to bleed again. He sat in his car for a long time, staring out at the tree line where shadows danced. Somewhere out there, Emily and Daniel were either still running or still hiding. But whatever they had risked to send that letter, it meant something had changed. And whatever that change was, it was coming. For everyone. By the time Ray Martinez returned to Willow Creek, the world felt colder. It wasn't the weather, it was the weight of what he now carried. Every name, every note, every whispered warning etched into the pages of Daniel's journal or buried deep in a government file had begun to press inward like a narrowing corridor. The shadows weren't metaphor anymore. They were real. They moved in silence, disguised in bureaucracy, in forgotten badges, in memories too fragile to trust. Martinez had seen it before, in other cities, other investigations, but never this close to the bone. This wasn't just a case. It had become a reckoning. He locked the flash drive, the Anchorage documents, and the photocopied journal in a secure case inside the sheriff's office. But he no longer believed that walls and locks could keep danger out. There were too many eyes now, too many things that had been quiet for too long beginning to stir. And worst of all, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It started as a vague unease, a twinge in his gut when he walked to his car at night, or the way the lights in his motel hallway would flicker just once as he passed. Then came the calls. No voice, just static, every night, always at 2:17 a.m. The first time, he hung up. The second, he listened longer, thinking he might hear a breath, a cough, anything. The third time, he answered but said nothing. The silence on the other end stretched so long it felt sentient. Then came a low mechanical click, and the line went dead. He reported it, of course, but the techs found nothing, no number, no trace, just digital vapor. Still, Martinez wasn't the kind of man who rattled easily. If they wanted him afraid, they'd have to try harder. So he kept going. He brought Rachel Hartman in again, this time sharing everything, the cabin discoveries, the photo of Rourke, the Greaves letters, the flash drive. She listened without interrupting, hands clasped in her lap, her eyes never leaving his. When it was over, she spoke just one sentence. "They're still alive, aren't they?" He nodded. "I believe so, but they're not safe. And now, neither are we." The town itself had started to change. Small things, subtle things, a gray sedan parked too long outside the diner. A new face at the gas station that never spoke, just watched. Someone had broken into the local library's archives one night, but nothing was stolen, only rearranged, as though someone was checking what had been found and what hadn't. Even the sheriff, a man with roots too deep to pull, seemed suddenly cautious, like the ground beneath him wasn't solid anymore. Then, 2 nights after Martinez returned, the office was broken into. The lock on the back door had been cleanly removed. No forced entry, no alarm tripped. But the secure case had been opened. The contents weren't gone, but someone had handled them. The flash drive was turned upside down. The journal lay open to the page with the phrase, "Do not trust the man with the silver pen." And tucked into the edge of the map was something that hadn't been there before, a single black playing card, blank except for one symbol drawn in silver ink. A circle, bisected by a vertical line. Martinez stared at it for a long time. It was a symbol he'd seen once before, buried in the corner of a classified memo Project Anchor's internal insignia. The message was clear. Someone had been there. Someone had touched the story. And they wanted him to know it. He called in his Portland contact again, requesting an emergency in-person briefing. They met 2 days later in a rented storage unit, far from town. No phones, no electronics. The contact, a woman named Jen Carter, who had worked black-level security projects for over a decade, looked graver than he'd ever seen her. "I ran a secondary trace on Rourke," she said quietly. "He's not dead. He's not retired. He's been operating under a ghost protocol since 1991. He's involved with a private contractor now off books, off records. The kind of outfit that exists purely in deniability." Martinez felt the floor shift beneath him. "Why them?" he asked. "Why Emily and Daniel?" Jen shook her head. "I don't know yet. But whatever it is, it wasn't just surveillance. It was containment. They either saw something, heard something, or were part of something they didn't realize. And now someone's trying to close the loop." That night, Martinez went back to the cabin alone. He walked its perimeter slowly, flashlight in one hand, revolver in the other. He didn't expect to find anything, but he did. Pinned to the back porch, nailed into the rotting wood where no rain would touch it, was a new envelope. No return address, just his name. Inside was a Polaroid. Sitting on a bench in what looked like a train station, wearing a hoodie, hair tucked under a cap. She was looking at the camera, not surprised, not afraid, just resigned. On the back, in the same sharp lettering as the old letter, were the words, "Stop digging." Martinez sat on the porch for a long time, holding the photo like a weight. They were alive. They were watching, and they were trying to survive something. Too big to name, but the shadows, they weren't just following anymore. They were circling. The photo lay on Ray Martinez's kitchen table, staring up at him in the soft hum of the early morning light. Emily's face in the Polaroid was the same as it had been on the tape, and yet different, thinner, more shadowed, more resolved. There was no plea in her eyes, no desperation, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had long since made peace with uncertainty. She was alive, yes, but the message was clear. Stop digging. It was both a warning and a plea. And for the first time since this case had crawled its way back into his life, Martinez found himself at the crossroads between what was right and what was wise. He had spent a lifetime chasing justice, holding on to the belief that the truth, no matter how buried, how dangerous, deserved light. But now that belief was unraveling beneath the weight of something far older, darker, and deeper than he'd ever faced. This wasn't a murder, or a robbery, or a case of simple disappearance. This was something systemic, engineered. There were powers involved that moved without names, faces, or jurisdiction, only intention. And if he kept going, he wouldn't just be endangering himself. He would be pulling whatever net still held Emily and Daniel into the open. They had risked everything to vanish, and he was standing in the wreckage of their carefully constructed silence. Still, the question gnawed at him. Why now? Why send the letter after all these years? Why leave the flash drive, the photo? If they had truly wanted to be forgotten, they would have burned the past and buried the ashes. Instead, they pointed toward it, briefly, intentionally. That meant something had shifted. Something had broken through whatever fragile boundary they had managed to leave behind. And Martinez feared he might already be too late to stop what was coming. He spent the next day in near silence, poring through every note, every document, every scrap of evidence one final time. He didn't just read, he studied. He looked for patterns, for whispers hidden between lines. And then he saw it. A detail in the train station photo that hadn't struck him before. On the far wall behind Emily, just over her left shoulder, was a partially visible sign. Departure Gate 4, North Line. Below it, blurry but discernible, the words, Port Afton. It wasn't much, but Port Afton was real, and merely abandoned. Town in northern Idaho, known for its old timber roots and a train depot that hadn't operated publicly in over a decade. Martinez ran the records. The station had been decommissioned in 1988, but the tracks were still in use, leased irregularly to a private logistics firm tied to no known client. No scheduled departures. No ticket sales. Just names on shipping manifests that meant nothing. But Emily had been there, and someone had taken the photo recently enough that her appearance matched that of the video. Almost exactly. He knew what that meant. She had left a trail on purpose. For him. He packed light, just a duffel, a flashlight, the journal, and his badge, even though it held no real power this far from home. He left a sealed envelope on the sheriff's desk in Willow Creek with instructions to open it only if he didn't return within 72 hours. Inside were copies of everything, documents, maps, names, and the photo. The last words he wrote in the letter were simple. If they find me, tell them I knew. And I went anyway. Driving through the winding roads of Idaho, the forests growing thicker, Martinez could feel the distance from ordinary life stretching like taut wire. This wasn't just a physical journey. It was a step into the quiet between worlds. Port Afton came into view near dusk, a sliver of cracked road and rotting signage, surrounded by trees that felt too still. The train station sat at the edge of it all, gray and sun-bleached, its platform overgrown with moss and silence. He parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance on foot, each step slow, careful. The building looked empty, abandoned. But he'd seen enough in his life to know appearances could lie. He slipped around the side, found a boarded window with just enough space to peer through, and saw what he didn't expect: light. A dim glow from deep within the building. And movement. Someone was inside. He moved closer. Just as he reached the rear door, a sound stopped him. Soft. Footsteps. Behind him. He turned sharply, hand instinctively going to the grip of his revolver. But it wasn't a threat that met him. It was her. Emily. She stood maybe 15 feet away, hands in the pockets of a gray coat, her hair shorter than in the photo, eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made the whole world go quiet. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it from the tape. "I had to be," Martinez replied softly. "You sent the letter." "No," she said. "We left a letter. But we didn't mean for it to reach you. Someone intercepted it. Someone wanted it delivered." Martinez's heart pounded. Why? Why now? Emily glanced toward the depot behind her, then back at him. "Because they're cleaning up anyone who ever touched anchor. We got wind of it weeks ago, and we tried to warn you without exposing ourselves. But it's too late now. You followed too far." A sound echoed inside the station. A clang. Voice. Then silence. Emily stepped closer, lowered her voice. "You have to make a choice, Ray. Walk away and this trail ends here. Or follow me through that door and see everything. But you won't come back the same." Martinez held her gaze. Then, slowly, he nodded. He didn't come this far to stop now. The door creaked open on rusted hinges, and Ray Martinez stepped into the train station. His heartbeat steady now, not from calm but from clarity. This was no longer about a case or justice or even the truth. It was about understanding what had been stolen, what had been buried, and what still might be saved. The air inside the depot was thick with the scent of old wood, engine grease, and something else maybe, or the remnants of voices that hadn't echoed through these walls in decades. Emily stepped ahead of him, silent and composed, as though she had rehearsed this moment 100 times before. Her movements were precise, her shoulders squared, but there was a weight in her that didn't come from age. It came from years of watching the world from behind glass, always moving, never seen. She led him down a narrow corridor at the far end of the depot, past rooms with boarded windows and long abandoned benches. They reached a locked steel door, and she paused only briefly to key in a sequence on a rusted panel hidden behind an old service map. The door opened into a concrete stairwell, lit faintly by flickering bulbs that buzzed like insects in the silence. Martinez followed without a word. Whatever waited below, he had already chosen it done at the bottom. The hallway widened into a series of underground chambers, part storage facility, part fallout shelter, part something else entirely. Old equipment lined the walls, filing cabinets chained shut, crates marked with federal codes long out of circulation. It wasn't just a hideout. It was a vault for the forgotten. And seated at the far end of the main room, hunched over a table beneath a single swinging light, was Daniel. He looked older, of course. His hair had thinned, lines carved deeper into his face, but his eyes were the same sharp, calculating, wary. When he saw Martinez, he didn't rise, didn't smile. He simply nodded once, like he'd been expecting him all along. "You made it," he said, voice roughened by years of disuse or distrust. "I had to," Martinez answered. "You left a trail." Daniel looked at Emily, then back at him. "No. Someone else did. Someone on the inside who wanted this to end. We're not the only ones left." They sat together at the table while Emily remained near the door, her eyes never straying far from the stairwell. Daniel pulled a map from a leather pouch, spreading it across the table. Lines crisscrossed the paper in ink of different colors: red for movement, blue for signals intercepted, black for confirmed disappearances. Names marked the margins. Some crossed out, others circled. In the center, underlined twice, was the word Recluse. Project Anchor was never dismantled. Daniel began. They just rebranded. New funding, new faces, but the same goals. Identify civilian anomalies, intercept them, contain them. "What kind of anomalies?" Martinez asked. "People who overheard something they shouldn't have. Scientists who questioned classified research. Hikers who stumbled into the wrong field test. Couples who saw something." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. "We were in the woods that day," Daniel continued, "scouting a camping site weeks before the wedding. We found a downed aircraft. No markings. 2 bodies. Suits, not uniforms. They were carrying sealed cases and maps that didn't match any public geography. We reported it stupidly. Within 48 hours, we were being followed. Phones tapped. Cars showing up outside the house. Then came Rourke." Martinez felt the name chill the air. "He offered protection," Emily added, voice low. "Told U.S. we'd seen something tied to national defense, and that if we agreed to disappear quietly, we'd be left alone. But we didn't trust him, so we ran." Daniel nodded. "We've been running ever since." Martinez leaned back, absorbing the enormity of it all. They had been collateral damage in a machine designed to self-preserve, and yet somehow they had survived. Scarred, hidden, but alive. But why reach out now? He asked. Why send? "The letter?" Emily answered. "Because they've restarted the program. But this time, they're not just cleaning up. They're eliminating anyone who was ever connected. Our names are back on a list. Yours too now." Daniel handed him another envelope. Inside were coordinates, encrypted files, and a second flash drive. "It's all here," Daniel said. "Proof. Names. Locations. You can take it. Expose them. Or you can walk out of here and forget everything. Either way, we disappear for good after tonight. This place will be gone by morning." Martinez looked down at the drive. It was heavier than it should have been. Not in mass, but in meaning. You're asking me to choose, he said. No, Emily replied. We're giving you the chance too. Something no one ever gave us. He looked between them. Two people who had traded their lives for silence, for survival, for love that endured even when the world conspired to erase it. And in that moment, Martinez felt a clarity he hadn't known in years. He couldn't undo what had been done to them, but he could make sure it didn't happen again. He rose slowly, placed the drive into his pocket, and nodded. I'll carry it. Emily stepped forward and touched his arm gently. Then go. And be fast. They didn't say goodbye. There was no need. Martinez climbed the stairs and exited the depot alone. The night air bit colder now, and somewhere in the trees a crow gave a single cry before vanishing into the dark. By the time he looked back, the lights inside the station were already out. The door closed. No sign anyone had ever been there at all. He drove without stopping, phone off, eyes scanning every rear-view shadow until dawn. By the time the sun rose over Willow Creek, he was already drafting his first report. It wouldn't be official. It wouldn't go through channels, but it would be the beginning of something, a crack in the wall. And though he never heard from Emily or Daniel again, he sometimes dreamed of them walking hand in hand beneath a canopy of trees somewhere deep. In the world's quiet, alive in the only way that ever truly mattered, hidden, but free. And so, the story of Emily and Daniel fades once more into the silence of the trees, leaving behind only echoes, a trail of truth, and a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones we never see. If their story moved you, made you think, or simply kept you listening until the very end, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving it a thumbs up, and most importantly, leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story stayed with you? Do you have your own memory, mystery, or moment to share? Every voice matters here, and I read every single comment. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and remember, some stories are forgotten until someone dares to remember them again.